Hey nerds, welcome to Supergirl Theories and Conspiracies. I'm Brian from Good Nerd Bad Nerd. So we had episode 2 this week, and a new villain from the comics, and a lot of continuing the groundwork for big things that are happening this season. But first, let's just get started with probably, in my mind, the biggest sign that the show has no idea what to do with Jimmy, and that's that he's being phased out of the one thing he still had. With Catco now under the ownership of Lena Luthor, she's kind of really taking over, and she was phasing him out, and things aren't good there, and it just kind of showed how unimportant he really was. So the show, I feel like, is trying to encourage that character to move on. Maybe he's going to go back to Metropolis. I just don't see that character very long on the show. Maybe as Guardian, something's going to happen. He's going to get hurt. We'll see. But I think the show is finally realizing he's not the best character. They brought him in to be a love interest, but they quickly squashed that. So that all that being said, I don't foresee Jimmy to be very long on the show. Now, on the other side, another person who we know is not long for the show is Maggie. And it was announced before the season even started that she was not going to be a continuing character on the show, and they really are laying the groundwork for her to leave in one way or another. I don't think they're going to kill her off. That would be actually pretty terrible if they did that, but I do see that the relationship between her and Alex is going to come to a head, and I believe it's going to be around the issue of children. Alex has clearly stated she wants children, Maggie does not. And just the entire episode was laying groundwork that they really do have hard time coming to an agreement, especially, starting it off with the issue of Band versus DJ, which was very humorous that, John was so specific about his preference of a DJ, but it was more important of how it showed that there's already issues there, and that was a nothing issue. When it comes to the idea of children, that's a big deal, and I think that's going to be kind of the breaking point for them. Now, before we get into the big characters, the last thing I want to point out is Winn gets abused a lot at that office. If he knows something and people want to get it out of him, they have no problems bullying him. So, as the nerd, I feel bad for him. I like Winn. I think he's one of my favorite characters on the show. So, they bully him out of that. And Alex has no qualms about admitting that. She tells Kara, you can't tell Winn anything because, we're just going to get it out of him. And I think the show needs to stop doing that, because that's not an okay way to treat that character. It's not an okay way to treat characters in general. So that being said, let's move on to the big characters this week. We had a lot more backstory and information about the character Sam and her daughter Ruby. Her daughter believes she's a superhero, that she has powers, and she was testing it this week. And it's interesting because the impression the show is giving us is that Rain, or Sam, is Kryptonian. But if that was the case, her powers would not have been dormant. I don't care what kind of maybe psychological trauma she had when her ship crashed. Absorbing that much yellow radiation from the sun after how many years? 15 years? She would be well aware of her abilities. And you can see even now they aren't fully fleshed out. So who really is Rain? Well, I haven't really gotten too much into the character this season. I did the final episode of last season, but she's not actually Kryptonian. The world killers that were made by the Kryptonian scientists, there were 5 of them, and they were aliens from other planets that were taken by these Kryptonian scientists. And because they were trying to recreate these world killers for some reason. I don't exactly know why they were trying to recreate world killers. That doesn't seem like something you just do unless you have mad scientist in your title. But the interesting thing about this, and it's why Rain is a very good villain or character for Supergirl to deal with, because besides the fact that they do in the comics, is that one of the lead scientists on the World Killer project was her dad, Zor-El. And eventually he actually regretted his role in that experiments in creating the World Killers. But that doesn't change the fact that he actually is one of the ones that did create Reign and the other World Killers. So that's pretty interesting, and that has to come into play somehow, because we don't really know too much about her dad outside of little snippets. It's mostly been about her relationship with her mom and what that has meant, learning that she's not everything she thought she was. What would it mean when she learns her dad isn't everything she thought he was also? So that's more about Reign. Now, the last thing for this week, Sai. Sai is a character from the comics. She's actually not in it too much. She's mainly been portrayed as a villain. She has worked with Supergirl, not often. So I don't want people thinking that she was a hero that they've changed to be a villain. She's, for the most part, always been a villain. She was a part of the Suicide Squad, the Council, which is another one of these evil groups, and eventually, after she had died, she became a Black Lantern during the whole Darkest Night event. But the character we saw, and this was one of the hard parts they had about this, is how do you show psychic abilities and without people just kind of like staring at you, making a strained face. Well, they did a pretty good job seeing the kind of the trauma inside Kara's head. That was actually a really good way to do it. But the other part of this was it didn't seem like there was any consistency with what Sai's powers were. And that's because in the comics, she has a ton of powers. Her powers include psychokinesis, telepathy, telekinesis, flight, power absorption, energy projection, transformation, psychic links, and teleportation. So this character, if there's a mind power, this character can do it. And so she's very overpowered. But, you know, they gave us the lesson of mind over matter, and, you know, you can't hurt me with fear anymore. It was like Supergirl's version of It. Spoiler if you haven't seen the movie, the clown feeds on fear, and then if you weren't afraid of it anymore, then it had no power over you, and that's exactly what happened here. The book's been out for decades, and there's been many, so never mind. Anyways, what did you guys think of the episode? I'm hoping that things are really going to start picking up with the Reign storyline, and I want Morgan Edge to come back because I think he's going to be a great villain for this season. So really looking forward to how that plays out in the upcoming episodes. But all in all, not too bad. It wasn't my favorite episode, but they're still dealing with repercussions from the season finale of last season. So I understand why they did this episode the way they did it and why they picked Sai. But before I close, there was a question in the comments from last week if I was going to be doing a theories video on Inhumans. I hadn't planned on it. Maybe I'll do some video at the end once it's all done and I can sit down and really absorb it. But I just, A, from logistics, I don't have the time. But B, I did a initial review of the first episode on my podcast